The affair began in a quiet corner of the Whitmore mansion, between a housekeeper named Elise and the heir who promised her forever. It was meant to stay secret, a soft escape from her invisible life. But when he ended it to marry someone from his world, Elise didn't just break, she changed. The mansion that once echoed with chores and laughter grew heavy with accidents no one could explain. A dress torn before the wedding, a fire alarm with no cause, a whisper through the halls. People said Elise lost control. They were wrong. Someone else was watching. Elise arrived at the Whitmore mansion with her suitcase half broken and her heart already tired. The house stood like an old monument of power, each room filled with portraits of people who never smiled. She had cleaned dozens of homes before, but none this grand or this quiet. The staff moved with rehearsed politeness, as if afraid of making noise. Daniel Whitmore, the heir, walked past them all with an ease that made her stare. He smiled once in her direction, and that small moment began something she couldn't stop thinking about. Her morning started before sunrise, dusting chandeliers that looked older than her. Daniel's footsteps echoed from the study each morning, where he worked with lawyers and accountants. When she served him tea, he always thanked her. It was a small thing, but in that house, kindness felt rare. He'd sometimes ask about her family, and she'd lie, saying they were fine. In truth, she had no one left. The mansion gave her routine and purpose, but his attention gave her something else, an illusion that she finally mattered. Daniel's fiancée, Vivian, lived mostly in the city, visiting on weekends. Her presence changed the air. The staff became stiffer, and Daniel quieter. Elise noticed how his smile disappeared when Vivian arrived. Once, while cleaning the terrace, she saw him staring out toward the garden instead of listening to Vivian's stories. Elise convinced herself that his silence meant unhappiness, that he saw something in her he couldn't name yet. She began working extra hours just to be near him when everyone else left. It wasn't love yet, but it was close enough to feel real. One evening, Elise stayed behind to polish silverware long after dinner ended. Daniel entered the dining hall, surprised to see her still there. He poured himself a drink and sat in silence, the sound of rain pressing against the windows. When he thanked her for her dedication, she blushed and lowered her eyes. He spoke about feeling trapped in expectations, about wanting something simple. His words stayed in her chest long after he left. That night she dreamed of walking beside him through those same halls, no longer invisible. Vivian's trips to the city became longer. Daniel's loneliness grew clearer. He started asking Elise to help him organize his study, a task he could easily assign to anyone. They spent quiet afternoons sorting through books, their conversations drifting toward life outside the mansion. He shared stories of his travels. She shared fragments of her past. Elise began believing they understood each other more than anyone else ever could. When their hands brushed one afternoon, she didn't pull away. It felt like confirmation of what she had already decided in her heart. One night, under the dim light of the corridor, Daniel kissed her. It was quick, hesitant, but it was enough. Elise felt something inside her shift, something both thrilling and dangerous. She spent the next days replaying it in her mind, convinced he would come to her again. When he did, everything changed. They met in hidden corners, behind locked doors, whispering plans they never meant to keep. For Elise, it was love. For Daniel, it was a secret mistake. But he never told her that, and she never asked. For weeks they lived between moments of passion and silence. Elise started wearing perfume again, one she could never afford before. The staff noticed her glow but said nothing. She began humming while she worked, smiling to herself when she passed Daniel in the hall. The mansion seemed lighter, the days shorter. She believed their story was growing into something lasting. But Daniel's phone calls became more frequent, and his late nights returned. He started avoiding her eyes. Elise didn't understand at first that their ending had already begun. Vivian returned one morning without notice. The mansion buzzed with preparation. Elise stood at the staircase when Daniel saw her. His expression held panic, not affection. He introduced Vivian to the staff as if Elise were a stranger. Every warm glance they had shared vanished behind formality. Vivian noticed nothing but elegance around her. Elise noticed everything. When she cleaned their bedroom that night, she found a letter on Daniel's desk, an engagement party invitation. Her hands shook as she folded it, realizing her dream had turned back into servitude. Elise stopped smiling. Her chores became mechanical. She still saw Daniel daily, but he acted like their affair had never happened. She told herself he was protecting her, that once the pressure passed, he would come back. At night, she stood outside his study door, listening to him and Vivian laugh. That sound cut through her like glass. She began writing him letters, pages filled with love, confusion, and quiet pleading. She never sent them. Instead, she hid them under her mattress, as if keeping them close could change his mind. The engagement party took place 2 weeks later. The mansion shined brighter than ever. Every light polished, every servant rehearsed. Elise worked in the background, invisible again. She watched Daniel lift a glass, smiling beside Vivian as guests clapped. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Elise held a tray so tight, her knuckles turned white. She told herself he was lying to everyone, that his eyes sought her in the crowd. But when the night ended, he didn't look her way once. Something inside her went still, like a door closing forever. Elise returned to her room after the party and sat by the small window. The laughter from the ballroom echoed faintly below. She opened one of her letters and read it aloud in a whisper. Each word felt foolish now, but she couldn't stop. She started tearing them one by one, then gathered the pieces in a jar. She kept it beside her bed like proof that love once lived there. The mansion outside remained quiet, but in Elise's mind the noise of what she'd lost grew louder each night. The next morning, Elise avoided everyone. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. She looked older, thinner, like someone who'd been drained of color. When Daniel crossed her path in the hallway, he greeted her politely, without emotion. She forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt. After that, she began keeping to herself, speaking little, working late. The other maids whispered about her silence, saying she'd become strange. Elise didn't care. Her only focus now was watching Daniel, memorizing where he went, who he spoke to, and how often he smiled. Rumors began circulating among the staff. Someone claimed Elise was writing to Daniel. Another said she had been seen outside his study at night. Vivian caught whispers of it and dismissed them as jealousy. But Daniel started avoiding eye contact with anyone, especially Elise. He called a meeting with the head butler, demanding stricter order among servants. Elise stood in the background, face calm, hands clenched. She knew this was about her. She told herself it was proof he still thought about her, even if it was through anger. Vivian started spending more time in the mansion, planning the wedding. Elise served her breakfast, pretending nothing was wrong. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the foyer, she overheard Vivian say Daniel seemed distracted lately. That single line became fuel for Elise. She convinced herself Vivian could never understand him the way she did. The idea of losing him to someone else grew unbearable. That night, Elise took one of her letters and hid it inside his desk drawer just to remind him she still existed. Days later, Daniel found the letter. He froze reading it, then burned it in the fireplace without hesitation. Elise watched from the hallway, her expression calm, her thoughts unraveling. She realized love wasn't enough anymore. If she couldn't have him, she'd make sure no one else truly did either. She started cleaning near his room every evening, waiting for a chance to be close again. Every small act became a quiet rebellion against being forgotten, and each one pulled her further into something she couldn't undo. Elise began moving like a ghost through the mansion, leaving small traces of herself where Daniel might find them. A folded napkin in his office, a scent of her perfume in the hallway, a note slipped under his door that said nothing at all. She wanted him to feel her absence as much as she felt his distance. The other staff noticed small changes in her behavior, but they couldn't prove anything. Elise's quiet persistence became her secret language of revenge. gentle reminders that love once awakened never fully goes away. Daniel started growing restless. He'd walk into rooms and pause, sensing something familiar yet wrong. His suits were pressed but slightly out of place, his documents rearranged, and the faint smell of Elise's perfume lingered where it shouldn't. Vivian told him he was imagining things. Elise watched from corners, her face calm while her mind spun faster. She believed Daniel was reaching out in return through these coincidences, though they were her own creation. In her mind, this was their way of talking again, a conversation no one else could hear. Vivian became suspicious. She began questioning the staff about misplaced items and unwashed linens. Elise pretended to help, offering fake concern. Her act was flawless, earning Vivian's trust just enough to lower her guard. Meanwhile, Elise whispered rumors to other servants, suggesting someone was stealing from Daniel's study. It didn't take long for fear to spread. People avoided eye contact with her, worried she might accuse them next. Elise used their discomfort as a shield, moving freely and unnoticed. She had learned that control wasn't about power, it was about fear, and she had plenty to give. Daniel's patience thinned under the constant tension. He ordered stricter schedules and shorter breaks, trying to restore order. Elise worked quietly, but her mind wasn't on chores anymore. She imagined Vivian gone from the house entirely, replaced by her own presence beside Daniel. Each time Vivian laughed, Elise's hand tightened on whatever she held, a cloth, a cup, or the back of a chair. The thought of Daniel's wedding became unbearable. She didn't want to ruin it outright. She wanted it to collapse slowly from the inside the way her heart had. When a staff member found one of Elise's letters tucked behind a cupboard, panic followed. It was unsigned, but everyone recognized the handwriting. The head butler handed it to Vivian, who confronted Daniel in private. Elise lingered outside the door, listening to their voices rise. Daniel denied everything, calling it a misunderstanding. Vivian's silence afterward said she didn't believe him. Elise smiled faintly in the hallway, invisible again but satisfied. To her, the letter had done its work. A small fracture in their perfect facade was all she needed to start pulling everything apart. The days turned colder, and tension in the mansion grew thicker. Daniel began avoiding eye contact with everyone, but especially Elise. She in turn began planting small reminders of herself. His missing cufflinks placed near her cleaning cart. His cologne bottle moved from the study to the laundry room. He would find them and stare, confused, but never speak. Elise saw his silence as proof of his longing. In truth, he was only afraid of scandal. Their memories were a shadow that followed him, and she intended to make sure it never left his side. Vivian noticed Daniel's unease. One afternoon, she found a hairpin on his desk, one she didn't own. Daniel swore it was nothing, but the look in Vivian's eyes said she recognized the truth. That night, Elise watched their argument through the keyhole of the drawing room. Vivian's voice carried sharpness, while Daniel's tone was tired. Elise felt both joy and pity. Joy because her presence had split them apart. Pity because she believed Daniel couldn't admit his true feelings. It didn't matter anymore. The wedding would never happen. Elise was certain of it. After that night, Elise's routines changed. She began entering Daniel's study when no one else was around, touching his things like they belonged to her. She started keeping a list of every small secret she uncovered: meeting schedules, family accounts, private notes. Her obsession with knowing him completely replaced her need to be loved by him. Daniel's life became her story to narrate, and she refused to be written out of it. She found his bus ticket from 1999 tucked inside a book and slipped it into her apron pocket, as if fate had chosen her. Each night she replayed memories of their time together, but her mind began changing them. The moments grew grander, the affection deeper, the promises clearer than they ever were. Her imagination filled the gaps reality left behind. When Daniel looked at her once with concern, she mistook it for love. She believed he was trapped by expectation, that he wanted her but couldn't fight for her. Elise convinced herself she was saving him from Vivian, from duty, from himself. She began to think of her actions not as revenge, but as mercy. Elise's control spread quietly among the staff. She learned which servants feared losing their jobs and which ones held grudges. A few whispered about missing jewelry and unpaid wages. Elise used their secrets as currency, turning one against another until no one trusted anyone. The mansion's order began to crack. Vivian blamed Daniel's leniency. Daniel blamed bad management. Only Elise knew it was all her doing. She cleaned the same halls she had poisoned with lies, smiling at her reflection in the polished floors. Power, she realized, was a silent companion. Late one night, Elise placed a thin red thread under Daniel's pillow. It was meaningless to anyone else, but to her it represented their bond, something fragile yet permanent. When Daniel found it, he felt a strange unease. He didn't know why it unsettled him so deeply. He threw it away, but Elise replaced it again the next day. Each morning he'd find it back in its place. He began losing sleep, questioning his sanity. Elise felt triumphant watching him unravel. She told herself love always leaves marks. She just chose to make hers visible. Vivian hired additional staff to prepare for the wedding. Elise viewed them as intruders and treated them with cold civility. One of them, a young maid, noticed Elise entering restricted rooms. When confronted, Elise smiled and said she had permission. The maid didn't believe her and reported it to the head butler. That night, Elise followed the maid to her quarters and left a broken bracelet under her pillow. The next day, Vivian accused the maid of stealing it. She was dismissed within hours. Elise never said a word, but her victory felt quiet and complete. The mansion's harmony collapsed completely. Servants quit without explanation. The butler grew weary and Daniel withdrew from everyone. Elise was the only constant presence, always reliable, always near. Daniel started avoiding her eyes but couldn't bring himself to fire her. She was efficient, loyal, indispensable. Or so he thought. Elise watched him lose confidence piece by piece, just as she had months before. She found peace in the symmetry of it all. The same pain he gave her now returned to him, hidden beneath perfect manners and polished silver trays. One morning, Elise began keeping a written record of Daniel's movements. She knew when he left his study, how long he spent at breakfast, and when he spoke to Vivian. Her notes filled an entire notebook, her secret biography of his days. It gave her comfort, a sense of purpose. She even tracked his expressions when he smiled, frowned, or seemed distracted. The more she documented, the more she believed she understood him better than anyone else. In her mind, this wasn't madness. It was devotion shaped by precision and care. Before moving deeper into what truly began inside that mansion, make sure to support this story if you're still here. Drop a comment telling where you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next inside the Whitmore estate. Elise started behaving differently toward Vivian, showing unexpected warmth. She helped her choose fabrics for the wedding and offered to arrange flowers. Vivian, unaware of the deceit, began trusting her. Daniel felt relieved that tension had eased, though he didn't understand why. Elise used this false peace to her advantage, planting hints of Daniel's disloyalty in subtle ways, a misplaced cufflink, a faint perfume scent, a comment phrased like concern. Vivian began questioning everything again, while Elise quietly stirred the fire she pretended to help extinguish. Every smile she gave now carried poison underneath. Vivian's doubts deepened. She began visiting Daniel's study unannounced, finding small things that didn't belong. A napkin with lipstick, a missing tie replaced by another. Daniel dismissed her suspicions. Frustrated by her constant questioning, Elise observed their tension from a distance, savoring each argument she caused. The staff noticed Daniel's exhaustion and Vivian's growing coldness. Elise ensured they did, feeding gossip that Daniel's love for Vivian was only for appearances. Soon whispers spread beyond the mansion, reaching nearby towns. Elise felt satisfaction blooming like a hidden flower in the garden. Daniel confronted Elise privately. After realizing she'd been near his study again, he asked her to respect boundaries. His tone sharp but uncertain. Elise nodded politely, her eyes steady. She didn't argue or explain. That night she stood outside his door again, listening to his restless pacing. She thought of how easily he dismissed their past, and how easily he believed silence could erase her. She whispered his name into the hallway, not expecting an answer. The sound faded, but for Elise, it was enough. It reminded her she still existed to him. The mansion grew colder as winter approached. Vivian wore layers of silk and bitterness while Daniel stayed buried in work. Elise watched both of them decay in different ways. She began cleaning rooms no one used, her steps echoing through empty corridors. She imagined Daniel searching for her in those rooms, calling her name. That image comforted her. When she saw him glance at her during breakfast one morning, she took it as a sign that he still cared. Her world no longer needed truth. Belief was more powerful. One night, Daniel caught Elise standing outside his door again. His patience broke, and he told her she was crossing lines that couldn't be ignored. She apologized calmly, saying she'd only come to return a misplaced key. He didn't believe her but took it anyway. Elise returned to her quarters and began crying without tears. Anger had replaced sadness completely. She decided Daniel didn't deserve peace or forgiveness. She would make him remember her in ways he could never erase, even if it destroyed both of them. The staff avoided Elise now. Her quiet demeanor had turned unnerving. She spoke little, but when she did, it was to correct others or remind them of their duties. The butler tried to confront her once, but stopped midway, uneasy under her gaze. Elise used their fear to her advantage, controlling schedules and shifting responsibilities. The mansion felt like it belonged to her again, not through love but through dominance. Daniel noticed the change but couldn't pinpoint why everything seemed slightly off balance. Elise liked that confusion. It made her feel powerful again. Elise began working late at night, cleaning rooms that were already spotless. The sound of her footsteps became familiar to the night guards. When asked why she worked so long, she said it helped her think. In truth, she wasn't cleaning anymore. She was studying the house, its locks, lights, alarms, and blind spots. Each corridor became a map of possibilities. She felt safe in the quiet, surrounded by her own thoughts. The mansion had stopped feeling like a workplace. It had become an extension of her mind, loyal and silent. Daniel caught Elise in his room again one evening. He froze at the sight of her folding his shirts like she used to. He told her she needed to stop, that she couldn't keep doing this. She nodded with a calm smile, saying she only wanted to help. When he walked away, she stayed behind, staring at the space where he stood. Later she returned and placed his old watch inside her drawer. Keeping it wasn't theft to her. It was a souvenir of a life that should have been hers. Vivian noticed Daniel's unease but misread it as guilt from overworking. She decided to plan a dinner to lighten his mood. Elise oversaw the arrangements, ensuring every detail was perfect. During the meal she moved quietly, serving wine and watching. Daniel avoided looking at her, but his discomfort was clear. Vivian smiled through forced charm, pretending not to notice. The atmosphere felt fragile, like glass ready to crack. When Elise passed Daniel's chair, their hands brushed briefly. It was unplanned, but it reignited the storm Elise had been waiting for. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in his study, replaying the dinner in his mind. The touch of Elise's hand lingered longer than he wanted to admit. Vivian entered to speak, but he said he was fine. Elise stood in the hallway listening again. She felt certain Daniel would never forget that brief contact. For her, it meant hope. For him, it meant dread. The mansion felt smaller, the walls closing in with secrets only the three of them shared. Elise looked toward his door and whispered to herself, it wasn't over yet. A week later, the Whitmore mansion hosted another dinner, this time with business partners. Elise prepared the dining hall, ensuring every candle burned evenly. During the meal, the lights flickered and went out. For a moment, the guests froze. When power returned, Vivian's diamond necklace was gone. Panic spread quickly. Staff were searched, and Daniel apologized profusely to his guests. Elise stood silently among them, her face unreadable. Hours later, she watched from the hallway as Vivian accused a maid of theft. Elise slipped away quietly, the necklace hidden beneath her apron, feeling the thrill of control return. The investigation continued through the night. The butler checked every drawer and bag. Elise offered to help, pretending outrage at the accusation. When the necklace was found inside the maid's trunk, Vivian dismissed her immediately. The poor girl cried, pleading innocence. Elise placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering sympathy before leading her out. When the door closed, Elise smiled faintly. The mansion was once again hers to shape. Daniel didn't suspect her. He saw only chaos among the staff. Elise had managed to make herself look like the only person he could trust. The following morning, Daniel thanked Elise for her calmness during the incident. He said she was dependable, unlike the rest. Those words filled her chest with warmth. It felt like the old days again. His trust, his praise, his quiet tone. She took it as a sign of reconciliation. But for Daniel, it was a courtesy, not affection. Elise didn't see the difference. She began planning ways to remind him of what they once shared. It was no longer about forgiveness. It was about making him remember who had always been there when everything else fell apart. Elise decided to use the mansion's routines to her advantage. She altered cleaning schedules, delaying tasks in rooms where Daniel and Vivian spent time together. When Vivian's favorite perfume went missing, Elise replaced it with one Daniel once complimented her for wearing. The scent filled the halls, pulling Daniel into confusion. He recognized it instantly, though he couldn't explain why it lingered everywhere. Vivian complained about the smell, but Daniel couldn't bring himself to remove it. Elise watched from the background, satisfied. Her presence didn't need to be seen anymore. It lived in the air itself. Daniel finally confronted Elise one morning, his patience worn thin. He told her she needed rest, that maybe it was time she found work elsewhere. She nodded politely, her expression composed, but inside she burned. Leaving wasn't an option. Everything in that house, from the curtains to the mirrors, held pieces of her. The thought of someone else cleaning those rooms made her sick. That night she stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. She decided Daniel didn't understand what he was trying to get rid of. He was removing the only person who truly knew him. Elise tampered with the fire alarm that same week. It was a simple adjustment. A misplaced wire and a few drops of oil. During a small family gathering, the alarm blared, filling the mansion with noise and confusion. Guests rushed out while staff scrambled to locate the cause. Amid the chaos, Vivian tripped on the staircase and fell. Elise rushed to her side, calling for help. But inside she felt a calm satisfaction. Vivian survived, though her leg was badly injured. Elise wept in front of everyone, hiding her triumph behind practiced sorrow. Doctors came and went for days, and Vivian was confined to bed. Daniel's focus shifted completely to her care. Elise lingered near the door, always ready to assist. He thanked her repeatedly, unaware she was the reason for the fall. When he wasn't looking, Elise would touch his sleeve, just to feel connected again. He didn't notice, or pretended not to. She told herself that love required patience, but patience was running thin. She wanted Vivian gone, the house quiet again, and Daniel looking at her the way he once did. The police visited the mansion to confirm the fall was an accident. Elise gave a clear, steady statement, describing every detail except her involvement. They found no reason for suspicion. Vivian's parents demanded extra staff and new precautions. Daniel reluctantly agreed. Elise oversaw the arrangements with a calm smile, choosing people she could easily manipulate. At night she stood in Vivian's room, watching her sleep. The sight didn't bring guilt, only certainty. Everything was moving toward what she had imagined. All she needed was one more mistake from Daniel to finish her plan. Daniel blamed himself for the accident, convinced he hadn't fixed the railing in time. Elise saw the guilt eating him alive and fed into it. She told him he had done all he could, that he wasn't at fault. He looked at her with gratitude, the same way he used to before everything went wrong. She clung to that look as proof that she still mattered. When he left the room, she touched the chair where he had been sitting, pretending it was enough. But it wasn't. His kindness only reignited what she tried to suppress. Vivian's recovery was slow, and Elise used that time to isolate her. She intercepted letters meant for Vivian's relatives, rewriting a few to delay their visits. Daniel grew quieter each day, overwhelmed with worry. The mansion's halls turned somber, filled with faint echoes of conversations that no longer brought comfort. Elise felt powerful again. She controlled what came in and out of the estate. Daniel unknowingly depended on her completely. Each night, she wrote his name in her journal, tracing it over and over until the paper tore. Possession had replaced love entirely. Rain poured for days, washing away color from the garden. Elise worked by candlelight, polishing silver that already gleamed. The house was silent except for the ticking clock in the main hall. Daniel sat in his study most nights, drowning in paperwork and guilt. Elise brought him tea, standing close enough for him to feel her presence. He thanked her absent-mindedly. To her that small word meant everything. She began seeing herself as the only person keeping him alive, as if her care were the thread holding his fragile world together. The new servants kept to themselves, wary of Elise's quiet authority. She moved among them like a shadow, correcting mistakes and keeping notes on their behavior. One evening she overheard two of them whispering about her strange hours. Their words cut deep, but she pretended not to care. Later that night she placed one of Vivian's missing earrings in their cleaning bucket. By morning both were dismissed. The satisfaction she felt afterward was different. Less like victory, more like survival. It confirmed her belief that control was safer than kindness, and fear lasted longer than affection. Daniel's sister visited unexpectedly, bringing a change to the mansion's rhythm. She noticed Daniel's exhaustion and offered to help with arrangements for the postponed wedding. Elise disliked her immediately. The sister asked questions about staff, schedules, and finances, too many questions. Elise realized she couldn't manipulate this one as easily. That night she tore a page from her journal and burned it in frustration. She told herself the sister would leave soon. The Whitmore mansion belonged to her, and no outsider could challenge the order she had built. For the first time in weeks, laughter returned to the house. Daniel's sister brought light conversation, distracting him from grief. Elise watched from the corridor, her resentment simmering. She served drinks, her expression neutral, but every sound of laughter felt like betrayal. Later she overheard Daniel thanking his sister for helping him start over. Those words echoed in her mind like a threat. Starting over meant forgetting her. That night, Elise stood in front of her mirror and whispered that he would never start over, not while she was still breathing. Vivian's health improved slightly. She began sitting outside in the sunroom, reading letters that had been delayed. When she asked why her relatives never visited, Elise calmly said they were busy. Vivian seemed unconvinced. She mentioned noticing small inconsistencies around the house, missing items, moved objects, mismatched linens. Elise reassured her with a practiced smile. Inside she grew nervous. Vivian was more observant than she'd thought. She needed to act before the woman recovered too much strength. The mansion, once a sanctuary, was beginning to feel like a stage with too many eyes watching. That night, Elise started hearing faint sounds she couldn't explain. A bell ringing in the distance, soft and rhythmic, though there was no church nearby. At first, she thought it was her imagination. But each time it happened, she felt calm rather than afraid. She began to think of it as a sign, a reminder that destiny still favored her. She never mentioned it to anyone. To her the sound was private, like a message only she could hear. It became her secret comfort, the rhythm of a love she refused to let die. Daniel announced a plan for a small private wedding at the mansion once Vivian recovered. The date would be modest, just family and close friends. Elise felt the ground shift beneath her. Every part of her plan had been designed to delay this moment, not stop it completely. Now she needed something stronger. She volunteered to handle the decorations, the flowers, the arrangements. Daniel agreed, relieved to leave details to her. He didn't know she wasn't planning a wedding, she was preparing a goodbye. Neither of them would survive unscarred. Elise filled the house with white roses and lilies, their scent overwhelming. She told the florist it was Vivian's request, but it wasn't. Daniel's eyes watered when he entered the hall. The same flowers they had once shared in a secret corner of the garden. He didn't comment, only walked past silently. Elise followed his gaze, wondering if he remembered. The mansion shimmered with beauty, yet every bloom was a quiet reminder of deceit. For Elise this was art, a farewell built from nostalgia and pain disguised as celebration. The night before the ceremony, Elise couldn't sleep. The bell sound returned, closer this time, though no one else seemed to hear it. She walked through the corridors barefoot, following the echo until she reached the locked ballroom. The space was dark, cold, untouched since the last grand event. She felt watched but calm. She stood in the center, whispering that she had done everything for love. Her voice didn't echo back. When she left, she noticed her reflection in the mirror. A stranger's face, calm yet unfamiliar. Morning arrived heavy and gray. Elise dressed carefully, tying her hair neatly. She placed a small vial in her apron pocket, a mixture she'd prepared from the medicine cabinet. Its purpose wasn't fixed yet. Maybe she'd use it on Vivian's drink, or maybe her own. She hadn't decided. The house buzzed with nervous joy, everyone too distracted to notice her stillness. She stood at the end of the hallway, watching Daniel adjust his cufflinks. He looked tired, older. In her mind they were already bound together, even if the world didn't see it. Vivian's gown shimmered as she walked down the grand staircase. Elise stood nearby, pretending to admire it. She had switched Vivian's perfume earlier, replacing it with the same scent Daniel once gave her long ago. The fragrance filled the air around them. Daniel caught it instantly, his expression faltering for a second. Elise saw it, and smiled faintly. The memory hung between them like smoke. Vivian asked if something was wrong, and Daniel shook his head. For Elise, that tiny pause was victory. Even today she could make him remember. The ceremony was brief, performed inside the small chapel behind the mansion. Elise stood at the doorway, unseen but close enough to observe. Her hands trembled inside her pockets, clutching the small vial. When Daniel slipped the ring onto Vivian's finger, Elise whispered to herself that it was wrong, that fate was being rewritten. She thought about stepping forward, about saying something to stop it all, but she stayed still, her eyes fixed on Daniel's face. His calmness was unbearable. The ceremony ended, and Elise felt like the ground beneath her had disappeared. After the ceremony, guests gathered in the dining room. Elise poured champagne, her movements automatic. Every smile and laugh around her felt like noise. Daniel thanked her for her service, calling her part of the family. The words cut deeper than any insult. She excused herself quietly and went to her quarters. Locking the door, the bell sound returned again, clearer than ever. It felt closer, like it was ringing just for her. She sat on the bed and whispered that it wasn't over yet, that the mansion still belonged to her. Later that night, Elise returned to the kitchen, drawn by a strange urge. She saw her reflection in the window and almost didn't recognize it. The vial still sat in her pocket, warm against her skin. She took it out and held it under the moonlight. The liquid shimmered faintly, like silver. She didn't know what she'd do next, only that it would change everything. The mansion slept quietly around her, She placed the vial on the table beside a folded napkin with Daniel's initials embroidered on it and whispered his name one last time. When morning came, the staff found Elise's room empty. Her bed was made, her journal missing. In the dining room, the napkin and vial were gone too. Daniel asked around, but no one had seen her leave. Vivian dismissed it as relief, saying she was glad the woman was gone. But Daniel wasn't convinced. That night, when he walked through the halls, he caught the faint smell of her perfume again. The bell sound echoed faintly in the distance, soft and rhythmic, as if something unfinished was still waiting to be heard. Days passed and the mansion returned to its routine, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered. The staff whispered about Elise's disappearance, each version more dramatic than the last. Daniel pretended not to care, yet his sleep grew restless. Vivian focused on decorating the guest wing, trying to restore normalcy. One evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen and noticed a folded napkin with his initials on the counter. It was identical to the one Elise had left behind. He called the staff, but no one admitted placing it there. The silence felt heavier than truth. Daniel began locking his study at night, but small items still moved. Papers rearranged, drawers slightly open. He blamed exhaustion, though deep down he didn't believe it. The faint scent of Elise's perfume returned, subtle but unmistakable. Vivian accused him of obsessing over the past, telling him the woman was gone for good. He agreed aloud but didn't believe it. The mansion seemed alive, aware of its own secrets. The servants avoided certain halls after dark, claiming to hear faint footsteps. Daniel dismissed them, yet he too avoided those same corridors. Vivian's frustration grew. She felt Daniel slipping away into guilt and paranoia. She tried to plan small gatherings to lift his mood, but he refused each one. Late at night, she caught him walking the halls, checking locked doors, listening for sounds no one else heard. She began to resent Elise, even in her absence. That resentment turned into fear. She started sleeping with the lights on, claiming it helped her read. Daniel didn't argue. He was afraid to say he'd heard the distant sound of a bell again, faint and rhythmic, somewhere deep within the mansion. One stormy night, Daniel found footprints near the servants' quarters. They were faint, leading toward the west wing, which had been closed since Elise vanished. He followed them with a lantern, each step echoing through the empty hall. The trail ended at her old room. Inside, everything looked untouched, except for a small stack of postcards on her bed, each one blank. On the back of the top card was a single word, faintly written in pencil: "Stop." Daniel stared at it for a long time, unsure whether it was a warning or a plea. Daniel didn't tell Vivian about the postcards. He kept them hidden in his desk drawer, convinced someone was trying to play with his mind. He spent hours studying the handwriting, certain it wasn't Elise's. He started noticing other strange details. A cracked mirror repaired overnight, a candle burning in the unused chapel. The servants avoided speaking of her name entirely now. Daniel tried to stay focused on work, but the house seemed to resist peace. Every time he thought things were settling, something small and precise would shift, as if she were still controlling it all. Vivian began noticing Daniel's distraction again. She accused him of still thinking about Elise, and he didn't deny it. Their arguments became quieter but sharper. To end the tension, Vivian suggested they leave the mansion for a few weeks. Daniel refused, saying the estate needed him. That night she packed a suitcase anyway. But before dawn, she found her clothes scattered across the floor, as if someone had emptied them deliberately. Daniel swore he hadn't touched them. The servants were terrified. Vivian stopped speaking about leaving after that. The house had made its opinion clear. The head butler, weary of the strange events, began keeping records of everything unusual: missing objects, strange noises, unexplained accidents. Daniel encouraged him at first, but soon grew irritated. He didn't want the house's reputation to suffer. Elise's name appeared several times in the reports, always connected to odd occurrences. One night, Daniel found the butler's notes torn apart and scattered across the floor. He blamed the servants for negligence, but deep down, he feared something else entirely. Each incident seemed deliberate, like a pattern Elise would have admired, a quiet, perfect manipulation. Daniel tried to restore order, setting curfews and restricting movement after dark. The staff complied, though many asked to be transferred to other estates. Fear crept into every corner. The mansion no longer felt grand. It felt haunted by memory and guilt. Daniel avoided Elise's old room, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. The postcards, the perfume, the faint bells, all of it formed a rhythm he couldn't ignore. He started drinking more, trying to quiet the noise in his head, but the house didn't allow silence anymore. It remembered every secret he wanted to forget. One night, Daniel walked into the west wing again, drawn by the faint glow of candlelight. The old ballroom doors were ajar. Inside, he found a single candle burning on the floor, wax dripping in slow circles. Next to it was the red thread Elise once left beneath his pillow. It was tied in a knot, looped around the base of the candle. His chest tightened with a strange mix of fear and longing. He didn't know if someone was tormenting him or if Elise had returned. He blew out the candle, but the scent of roses lingered. The next morning, Daniel claimed the candle must have been left over from a past event, though he knew that wasn't true. Vivian noticed his pale expression but said nothing. She focused instead on redecorating rooms, replacing furniture Elise once cleaned. But even with new fabrics and colors, the house didn't change. The feeling remained, thick and watchful. One servant resigned without notice, saying she couldn't stay in a place where walls seemed to breathe. Daniel wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but when he lay awake that night he felt the same thing too. Rain fell heavily for several days, trapping everyone inside. Vivian grew restless and insisted on inviting family to visit once the weather cleared. Daniel agreed, if only to distract her. That evening the sound of the bell returned again, louder this time. He followed it through the hallway, lantern shaking in his hand. The sound led him toward the wine cellar, deep beneath the mansion. The air smelled of damp stone and dust. The bell stopped abruptly, replaced by dripping water. On the wall, written faintly in chalk, was a word that froze him. Mine. Daniel stumbled back, breathing heavily. He rubbed the word away with his sleeve, refusing to believe what he saw. When he returned upstairs, Vivian noticed the dirt on his hands and asked what he had been doing. He lied, saying he was checking on the generator. She didn't believe him. Later, while everyone slept, he returned to the cellar to prove to himself it wasn't real. The wall was clean. No chalk, no word. But the bell began ringing again, faint and steady. He left quickly, refusing to look back. Vivian's patience ran out. She called a doctor to examine Daniel, claiming he was showing signs of exhaustion and delusion. Daniel didn't argue. He knew how he sounded, but the doctor's visit changed nothing. When asked about the noises, several servants admitted hearing them too. The doctor left puzzled, saying stress might be affecting everyone. That night, Vivian cried quietly in bed while Daniel sat by the window staring at the rain. He wondered if Elise had ever truly left, or if some part of her still lived inside the house feeding on their guilt. By the following week, Daniel had stopped attending meetings altogether. He stayed inside, wandering aimlessly through corridors. Vivian begged him to rest, but he refused. He felt drawn to the west wing again, as though the house wanted him there. The air felt colder near Elise's room. When he opened the door, he found her old notebook on the bed. The pages were filled with words written in neat, looping handwriting, his name over and over. He backed away slowly, heart sinking. Someone had been there recently. The ink on the final page was still wet. Daniel took the notebook to his study. Locking it in a drawer, he wanted to burn it but couldn't. That night, he dreamed of Elise standing in the garden, whispering his name, her face calm, eyes unreadable. When he woke, the bell was ringing again, faint but clear. Vivian asked what was wrong, and he said nothing. The staff pretended not to hear it, though they moved faster through hallways. Everyone began avoiding eye contact, each person silently wondering if the house itself had gone mad, or if it was only following Elise's design. Vivian insisted they move out temporarily, fearing Daniel's health was collapsing. He refused again, saying the mansion couldn't run without him. She begged him to think of her, of their future. Daniel's silence frightened her. She started packing secretly during the night. The next morning, her luggage was missing. It reappeared later in the attic, covered in dust, as if it had been there for years. Vivian screamed when she found it. Daniel didn't react. He stared at the floor, whispering Elise's name under his breath. The house seemed to sigh with quiet satisfaction. The bell didn't ring that night. Instead, a faint hum filled the halls like wind moving through pipes. Daniel couldn't sleep. He went to his study and poured himself a drink, his hands shaking. The moment he lifted the glass, it slipped and shattered. A single piece of paper fluttered from his desk. One of Elise's old letters, burned around the edges but still legible. He had destroyed them all months ago. Seeing it again made his chest tighten. He read the first line aloud. It said, "You promised forever." His voice broke before he finished. The next morning, Daniel gathered the staff and accused someone of tormenting him. No one confessed. The butler, trembling, handed him a report about missing wine bottles. Daniel barely listened. His thoughts spun too fast. He ordered everyone to leave the West Wing sealed indefinitely. When they hesitated, he shouted until his voice cracked. Vivian watched, horrified. She tried to calm him, but he shoved her hand away. Later, she told him he was scaring her. He didn't answer. That night, the bell returned again, louder than ever, echoing like laughter through the walls. Daniel snapped. He grabbed a lantern and stormed into the West Wing, determined to end the torment. The doors creaked as he entered. The light flickered across cracked wallpaper and forgotten furniture. On the wall, someone had written a message in charcoal. "Still here." His hand trembled as he touched it. For a moment he thought he saw movement in the corner, a shadow that looked too human to ignore. He stumbled backward, the lantern crashing to the floor. Flames licked at the old wood. Daniel ran, shouting for help as smoke filled the corridor. The fire spread quickly, but servants contained it before it reached the main hall. No one was injured, but the West Wing was ruined. When police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. They concluded the fire had started from a lantern accident. Daniel didn't correct them. He sat outside, covered in soot, staring at the scorched remains. Vivian stood beside him, silent. He whispered that he saw Elise in the smoke, standing just beyond the flames. Vivian said nothing. She simply walked away, leaving him to watch the ashes cool. In the following days, Daniel withdrew completely. He stopped speaking during meals, avoided eye contact, and barely left his study. The staff whispered that he had lost his mind. Vivian considered leaving for good, but guilt kept her there. She hired extra guards to monitor the property, though they too claimed to see flickering lights in the burned wing. The bell stopped ringing, replaced by silence. For Daniel, that silence felt worse. It wasn't peace. It was absence. The kind that followed something still unfinished, still waiting. One night, Daniel poured himself another drink and stared into the fireplace. The reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. He thought about Elise, the way she smiled, the way she believed love could be something permanent. He wondered if he had created the monster that destroyed his life. The fire crackled softly. Behind him, a faint sound of footsteps passed through the corridor. He turned quickly, but no one was there. Only the faint trace of her perfume lingered, sweet and cruel, reminding him that ghosts didn't always need bodies. Vivian found Daniel asleep at his desk the next morning, surrounded by papers and empty glasses. He looked peaceful, almost too still. When she touched his hand, it was cold. Panic surged through her as she called for help. The doctor declared heart failure, a sudden collapse from exhaustion and stress. The mansion fell silent once more. Vivian stood in the doorway, unable to cry. For all her pain, she had never truly hated him until now. She blamed Elise for everything, even in death. The name hung unspoken between every heartbeat of the house. The funeral was small, attended only by family and a few staff. Vivian insisted on holding it at the estate despite protests. During the ceremony, a strong gust blew through the chapel, extinguishing half the candles. No one spoke, but everyone felt something shift. As the coffin was lowered, the bell rang once again, soft, distant, and mournful. Vivian looked around, eyes wide, but no one else reacted. She left immediately after the burial, promising never to return. The mansion, once filled with life, now stood as a monument to silence and secrets. That night, the staff locked the doors early, too afraid to wander. The head butler, the last to leave the hall, claimed he heard faint humming from the west wing. The same melody Elise used to sing while cleaning. He didn't investigate. Instead, he blew out the candles and left the room dark. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, carrying the faint echo of a bell. Inside, the mansion waited patiently, alive with memories it refused to release. Somewhere deep within, the air smelled faintly of roses once more. After Daniel's death, the mansion became quiet again, but not peaceful. Vivian moved through it like a guest, never comfortable in any room. She dismissed half the staff, wanting fewer witnesses to her grief. The air inside seemed heavy, as if every breath carried memory. Late one night, while clearing Daniel's study, she found his hidden drawer. Inside were the postcards, each blank, except for one. It read, "You kept your promise." The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. Vivian dropped it and stepped back, her heart pounding as the faint sound of a bell returned somewhere deep below. Vivian tried to convince herself it was imagination, but the sounds persisted. The bell would ring faintly, always around midnight, followed by soft echoes like footsteps. She asked the servants if they heard it, but no one admitted to it. The butler suggested it was the pipes shifting in the walls. Vivian didn't believe him. The mansion had begun to feel alive again, in the same haunting way Daniel described before he died. She started locking her bedroom door and sleeping with a lamp on, the glow her only defense against the unseen. The police reopened their investigation, after an anonymous letter claimed Daniel's death was suspicious. They examined the fire-damaged west wing again, collecting what little remained. Vivian cooperated but resented every question. She wanted to move on, to sell the house and forget everything. Yet the detective found something she didn't expect. A notebook belonging to Elise, half burned but legible. The final entry mentioned Daniel's name, and one cryptic phrase, "He belongs to the house now." Vivian felt a chill she couldn't explain. The detective called it nonsense, but she couldn't stop rereading the line. At night, Vivian began dreaming of Elise standing in the hallway, her face calm and pale, holding a jar of something dark. In the dream, Elise didn't move. She only watched. Vivian would wake drenched in fear but unable to recall when she fell asleep. She started keeping notes of every detail, trying to make sense of it. Each morning, the notes were gone from her nightstand, replaced with a single red thread. No one in the house admitted touching them. Vivian began to wonder if Elise had ever left the mansion at all. The sound of the bell became part of her nights. It wasn't loud, but it was consistent, ringing like a heartbeat in the dark. Sometimes it came from the cellar, other times from Daniel's study. Vivian followed it once, trembling as she descended into the basement. The smell of old wood and mildew surrounded her. In the far corner she saw something small on the floor. A torn page from Elise's notebook. It said, "Forgiveness is the quietest form of revenge." She left quickly, locking the cellar behind her, but the ringing never stopped. Vivian began to see Elise everywhere. In reflections, in doorways, in the glass of framed photographs. At first she dismissed it as guilt, but soon even the servants noticed her distraction. They whispered that the lady of the house had gone mad. Vivian overheard them and dismissed 3 in one day. That evening she stood by the window, staring into the garden where Daniel was buried. She whispered that she wasn't afraid of Elise. But as she turned away, she noticed a faint handprint on the inside of the glass, small, delicate, and unmistakably real. Unable to bear it any longer, Vivian invited Daniel's sister to stay. The younger woman arrived cheerful, dismissive of the mansion's reputation. She called it superstition, but by her second night she changed. She heard the bell too. Both sisters sat awake until morning, listening to the sound travel through the walls. They searched every floor, every corner, and found nothing. The next day the sister left abruptly, refusing to explain. Vivian stood at the door watching her go, realizing she was truly alone in a house that no longer obeyed reason. The police returned days later with new information. Fingerprints from Elise were found on a broken wine bottle discovered beneath the floorboards of the West Wing. But there was another set of prints too, someone else's belonging to the butler. Vivian was stunned. The man had worked for the family for decades, loyal and quiet. He was brought in for questioning, his hands shaking as he denied involvement. He claimed he only moved the bottle to protect Daniel. The investigators suspected more, believing Elise and the butler shared secrets no one else ever knew. News spread quickly. The mansion filled with officers and investigators combing through every corner. Vivian stayed in her room, listening to their footsteps echo. The butler finally confessed. He had helped Elise hide evidence of her actions, fearing she would harm herself. He admitted moving the poison bottle the night Daniel died, but insisted Elise didn't mean to kill him. Vivian couldn't tell if he was protecting Elise or himself. The confession painted a picture of chaos and devotion, 2 people bound by loyalty to the same man who destroyed them both. The police called it a case of negligence and emotional instability, closing it quietly to avoid scandal. Vivian signed the paperwork with a blank expression, but inside she burned. She had lost her husband, her peace, and her home to a woman who had never truly left. She packed her belongings in silence, planning to leave the mansion forever. Yet on her final night, she heard the bell again. It was clearer now, almost melodic, as if bidding her farewell. She covered her ears, but the sound followed her into every room. As Vivian prepared to leave, she found a sealed envelope on her dresser. Her name was written on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a letter from Elise, dated months before her disappearance. It spoke of love, regret, and a strange acceptance. Elise wrote that she never intended harm, that everything she did was meant to keep Daniel close, even if it meant haunting him. Vivian dropped the letter, trembling. The paper smelled faintly of roses. For the first time she realized Elise might have been just as trapped by the mansion as they were. When Vivian handed the letter to investigators, they dismissed it as another obsession note, irrelevant to the case. But one detective noticed something odd. The handwriting on the envelope didn't match the letter inside. The letter was written by Elise, but the envelope had Daniel's handwriting. He had kept it hidden, meaning he must have known about it before his death. The detective wondered aloud if Daniel had helped Elise disappear. Vivian stared at him blankly, unable to respond. It was the first time she considered that Daniel might have loved Elise more than anyone realized. The discovery reignited public interest. Reporters surrounded the estate, spreading stories about murder, jealousy, and madness. Vivian shut the gates, refusing to speak. She tried selling the property, but no one wanted it. The mansion had become infamous, a symbol of obsession and decay. She wandered its halls one last time, her footsteps echoing where laughter used to live. In Daniel's study, she noticed a candle that had been burned recently, though no one had entered in weeks. She blew it out, whispering goodbye, knowing the house wouldn't miss her. It already had its ghosts. Vivian moved to the city, renting a modest apartment. At first she felt free, but the quiet unnerved her. She began hearing faint ringing again, softer, distant, but undeniably familiar. She told herself it was just memory. She tried to sleep, but dreams of the mansion followed her. Sometimes she saw Daniel standing beside Elise, both looking at her with calm faces. Other times she saw only Elise holding the same red thread, smiling faintly. Vivian started keeping a bell on her table, convincing herself that controlling the sound made her safe. Back at the Whitmore mansion, months passed without an owner. Dust gathered. Ivy crept across the walls and the staff were gone. One night, a caretaker making rounds reported hearing music in the ballroom. When he entered, the record player was spinning, though no electricity ran through the house. The tune was soft, almost familiar, a melody Elise used to hum. On the grand piano, a single red thread lay coiled like a ribbon. The caretaker left immediately, resigning the next day, saying the house didn't want people anymore. It wanted memories. Vivian's health declined over the next year. She grew pale, withdrawn, speaking little. Friends said she had never recovered from her husband's death, though few knew the full story. One afternoon she received a package with no return address. Inside was Daniel's watch, cleaned and still working. She hadn't seen it since the fire. Alongside it was a folded napkin embroidered with his initials. Her hands shook as she realized it was the one Elise once used to leave messages. She locked it in a drawer, but the ticking haunted her all night. Unable to bear it, Vivian hired a private investigator to trace the package. Weeks later, he returned empty-handed. The parcel had been dropped off anonymously at a rural post office, paid for in cash. Vivian dismissed him, though his final words stayed with her. He claimed the clerk remembered a woman with pale hair and calm eyes. Vivian didn't respond. She simply stared at the clock ticking steadily beside her. That night, the bell returned again, louder than before, echoing through her apartment as if carried from miles away. Vivian's sleep vanished entirely. She started wandering the city streets at night, drawn by any faint metallic sound that reminded her of the bell. People began avoiding her, calling her unwell. She stopped explaining. One evening she followed the sound to a quiet park. In the center stood an old fountain, cracked and dry. On its edge was a small jar filled with rose petals, the same kind Elise used to collect. Vivian knelt beside it, whispering her husband's name. When she looked up, the streetlights flickered. The jar was gone. She went home shaking. Back in her apartment, Vivian began writing again. Letters she never sent, addressed to no one. She filled pages with questions she didn't want answers to. Why did Daniel keep Elise's letters? Why couldn't the house forget? She stacked the letters beside her bed until they reached her lamp. One night, the pile toppled over, scattering papers everywhere. As she gathered them, she noticed one she hadn't written. It was written in neat, looping handwriting. It said, "You still hear me." She froze, realizing the ink was still wet. The following morning, Vivian packed her things and left without telling anyone where she was going. Days later, a taxi driver reported dropping her off near the Whitmore estate's gates. She walked through the overgrown path, suitcase dragging behind her. No one saw her enter, but neighbors swore they heard the bell ringing that night again, louder, continuous, as if welcoming someone home. The gates remained open for days, the mansion quiet but alive. Inside, a single candle burned in the window of the west wing. No one dared go near it. Weeks later, police arrived after receiving reports of trespassers. They found the mansion empty, except for footprints leading from the gate to Daniel's study. On the desk lay Vivian's handbag, her ID inside. The room smelled faintly of roses. A journal was open beside the chair, the last page filled with handwriting not her own. It read, "We're together now." The officers searched every floor but found no one. The only sound they reported hearing before leaving was the faint ring of a bell from somewhere above. The estate was sealed once again, marked unsafe for habitation. Locals began avoiding the area altogether. Some said the bell still rang every few nights. Others claimed it followed the wind. No one dared go close enough to check. Journalists wrote stories about the cursed Whitmore family. about love turned into obsession, and about a house that refused to let go of its owners. Over time, the story faded into legend, whispered by taxi drivers and neighbors who swore they knew someone who once worked there. Years passed and the mansion fell into ruin. The garden overgrew, swallowing the pathways. The windows cracked. The roof sagged. Yet anyone passing by swore it still had lights flickering inside at night. Some said a woman's silhouette appeared by the upper window, brushing her hair slowly. Others said a man stood behind her, watching. None stayed long enough to confirm. The property was left untouched. Its gates rusted shut. The bell, however, continued to ring faintly, marking time for no one but itself. A historian eventually purchased the land, intending to restore it for public tours. He dismissed the legends as gossip. During the renovation, workers uncovered a sealed cellar under the west wing. Inside were old belongings, Elise's cleaning uniform, a journal, and a cracked jar of perfume. The journal described her feelings for Daniel, her guilt, and her belief that love could never truly die. The historian closed it carefully, unnerved. When he left the cellar, he swore he heard footsteps behind him, though no one else was there. The bell rang once more, soft and steady. The mansion reopened years later as a historical site. Visitors came from far away, eager to see the place where love and madness blurred. The guide warned guests not to touch anything near the west wing. Some ignored the advice, claiming to hear faint music after. Others said they smelled roses where none were placed. Near Daniel's old study, a display held two items: a folded napkin embroidered with his initials, and a small red thread tied around it. No one could explain how it appeared there. The guide simply smiled and rang a small brass bell. The mansion became a local curiosity, its tours booked for months, but those who stayed late swore the air changed after dusk. The lights dimmed on their own, and the faint sound of a bell echoed through the halls. The historian who managed the site avoided the west wing entirely. He claimed the temperature dropped there even in summer. Each night he locked the doors, yet every morning something had been moved. A chair turned, a candle burned low, a faint scent of roses hanging in the air, as if someone had walked by only minutes before. He began recording the phenomena, determined to prove or disprove the legends. Cameras captured flickering lights and faint whispers that resembled a woman's hum. The sound file distorted whenever the bell rang. Visitors grew uneasy, reporting that their reflections didn't always match their movements near Daniel's study. One evening, a tourist fainted after claiming to see a woman's hand press against the glass from the inside. The historian dismissed it publicly but stopped sleeping in the mansion afterward. He started locking his notes in a drawer, the same one Daniel once used for secrets. Curiosity drew more researchers. They documented the lingering perfume, the gentle pressure of air that followed footsteps, and the faint outline of writing on walls that appeared then vanished. Words like mine and wait. Every expert had a theory, but none could explain the bell. It rang irregularly, often at midnight, sometimes during tours. Microphones placed near the sound picked up nothing but static. The historian grew obsessed with finding its source, even dismantling part of the ceiling above the west wing. He found no bell, no mechanism, only an empty space filled with the scent of roses. That night, while reviewing recordings, the historian noticed a reflection in one of the camera feeds, a woman standing at the end of the hall, head slightly tilted. He paused the video and zoomed in. The face was faint but clear enough to recognize Elise. Her eyes seemed fixed on him through the screen. He shut the monitor and left the study, shaken. The next morning, the file was gone from the computer. He tried to retrieve it, but the folder had vanished completely. Only one document remained, renamed overnight. You found me. The discovery unsettled him deeply. He stopped inviting visitors after dark and began keeping a lantern beside his desk. Yet even in daylight the mansion refused peace. One morning he found a small cake on the dining table, half eaten, a single candle melted into it. No one admitted placing it there. Beneath the plate was a torn page from Elise's journal written in careful script. Another year together. The historian realized it was Daniel's birthday. He sealed the dining room after that, but the smell of sugar and roses still drifted from beneath the door. Years passed, and the legend grew stronger. Locals said the mansion punished those who entered for the wrong reasons. Researchers came and went, but none stayed long. Some heard whispers in their sleep. Others claimed to see faces in mirrors. Eventually, the estate was abandoned again, locked by the county. Time began reclaiming it. The paint peeled, the floors warped, ivy covered the walls, yet the bell continued to ring faintly through storms and still nights alike. Even when no one was there to hear it, it rang, steady as memory. A decade later, a restoration crew arrived, hoping to preserve the architecture. The foreman dismissed the stories but soon noticed strange coincidences: tools missing, lights flickering, papers moved. One worker quit after seeing a figure walking across the upper landing where no floor remained. Another claimed to hear a woman humming through the ventilation shafts. The foreman laughed at first, but his laughter faded when he found a red thread tied neatly around his coffee mug one morning. He threw it away, but the next day, another appeared, looped around the handle again. The workers began refusing to stay after sundown. One night, the foreman decided to test the rumors. He walked alone into the west wing, flashlight trembling. The corridor felt endless, each step echoing louder than the last. Near the old ballroom, the beam caught a faint reflection, two figures standing close together facing him. He blinked, and they vanished. The flashlight flickered out, leaving him in darkness. When he turned back, he heard soft footsteps behind him, then the unmistakable sound of a bell. He ran out, swearing never to return. The project was abandoned again. The county sealed the gates permanently, declaring the structure unsafe. Over time, the story of the Whitmore estate became folklore, a cautionary tale of love, jealousy, and madness. Children dared each other to sneak through the gates at night, though few ever did. Those who tried claimed they heard faint music, like an old record spinning in the dark, and always without fail, the bell. It had become part of the land itself, echoing through trees and wind, calling for anyone who still believed in unfinished love. Years later, a storm struck the area, uprooting trees and flooding the nearby road. When it cleared, locals found the mansion still standing. Its windows were shattered, yet a light glowed faintly from the west wing. Investigators entered, finding the air strangely warm. In the center of the ballroom stood two chairs facing each other. On one lay Daniel's old watch. On the other, Elise's cleaning cloth folded neatly beside it. The bell sat between them on the floor, polished and shining as if untouched by time. It rang once when they entered. The investigators took photographs, but none of them developed correctly. Each image showed only static and faint shapes, though one captured two silhouettes near the chairs. They looked peaceful, sitting close. The case was filed away, dismissed as a camera malfunction. The bell was left untouched, too heavy to move. Months later, a caretaker checking the site found it missing. In its place was a single red thread coiled in a perfect circle. No one claimed responsibility. After that, the gates were sealed again, this time welded shut. Years turned into decades. The Whitmore estate faded from maps, reclaimed by nature. Ivy buried its walls, and trees grew where marble paths once led. Travelers who passed through at night sometimes reported seeing faint lights through the overgrowth. The bell's echo still drifted on the wind, soft but constant. Those who followed it never reached the mansion. It always seemed farther away than it appeared. Locals said the sound wasn't coming from the house anymore. It was coming from the land itself, from everything that had ever loved too deeply and refused to fade. In the nearby village, a small antique shop displayed an odd item, a brass bell with faint scratches on its rim, and a tag that read "From the Whitmore estate." The owner didn't know how it arrived there, it simply appeared one morning on the counter. Customers avoided touching it, claiming it felt too cold. One evening, the owner heard it ring on its own. When he turned, the bell was still. The next morning, the tag had changed. It now read, "We're home." The shop closed soon after, the bell disappearing once more. Decades passed. The story became folklore told by grandparents near fireplaces about the housekeeper who loved too much and the heir who couldn't love enough. Some said their souls never left. Others that the house itself absorbed their grief. Children would mimic the sound of a bell during storms, laughing until the real one answered back. No one ever discovered where it rang from. Over time, the mansion's name was forgotten. But the legend remained, a quiet warning that some hearts once broken never stop searching for what they lost. Long after, an author researching forgotten estates stumbled upon the legend. She followed old records until she reached the overgrown site. The mansion was gone, replaced by grass and wild flowers. As she stood there, a faint wind stirred the petals, carrying the soft scent of roses. She took a deep breath, writing her notes with trembling hands. Just as she turned to leave, she heard it, the faint ring of a bell. It wasn't loud or frightening, just gentle, like a greeting. She smiled, unsure why, and whispered a quiet goodbye to the air. That evening, the author returned to her hotel, playing back her voice recorder. Among the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, the bell chimed again. But beneath it, faintly, two voices whispered. One male, one female. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone sounded peaceful. She copied the file to her computer, yet it vanished, moments later. Her screen displayed a message instead: "Some stories don't end, they rest." She sat staring for a long time, unsure if she should publish what she'd found or leave it undisturbed. She decided to write the story anyway, changing names and details. The book became a quiet success, praised for its haunting realism. Readers claimed they felt like they'd lived inside the mansion themselves. Some reported hearing faint bells while reading late at night, though no such sound existed in the audio versions. The author dismissed it as imagination, but deep down she knew better. She kept a copy of the bell's photograph framed on her desk, the only proof of what she'd experienced, proof she never showed anyone. One winter night, while writing her final chapter, she heard the sound again, soft, distinct, and close. The pen slipped from her hand. She turned toward the window and saw two faint reflections in the glass. A man and a woman stood side by side, their faces calm. She whispered their names, though she didn't know how she knew them. The bell rang once more, and the reflections faded. When she turned back to her desk, her manuscript page was blank, replaced by a single red thread resting across the paper. After that night, she stopped hearing the bell. The book was released with no ending, just an open page that read, "Love remains." Readers thought it was symbolic, but she never explained. Years later, when she passed away, her belongings were auctioned. Among them was the framed photograph of the mansion's ballroom. The buyer noticed something strange in the image: two figures sitting in the chairs, their hands intertwined. No one else could see it, but he swore it was there. He hung it in his study, and sometimes heard faint music from it at night. Over time, the legend of the Whitmore estate became part of forgotten history again. Only small pieces remained. A rumor, a book, a photograph. The world moved on, but the story endured quietly, like a whisper that refused to die. Travelers passing through the valley where the mansion once stood claimed the air there smelled faintly of roses after rain. Some said it felt peaceful, others uneasy, but everyone agreed on one thing: the place felt like it remembered something it couldn't quite let go of. Decades later, an old man walking through that valley found a brass bell half buried in the grass. He picked it up, brushing off dirt and rust. It was small, worn, but still beautiful. When he shook it gently, it rang, a soft, perfect sound that lingered longer than it should have. The man smiled, pocketed it, and continued his walk. Behind him, the air shimmered faintly, as if sunlight had caught something invisible. The scent of roses drifted past him, carried by a breeze that felt almost like gratitude. That night, the old man placed the bell on his windowsill. It never rang again, but the house felt warmer somehow. His grandchildren loved the story of where he found it, though they didn't believe it. Years later, after he passed, the bell went missing from the windowsill. No one noticed until the house grew quiet again. Outside, during storms, neighbors sometimes claimed to hear faint ringing from his garden, soft and steady, like two hearts still keeping time. The legend had come full circle without anyone realizing. And so the tale of Elise and Daniel became something beyond tragedy. A memory stitched into the world itself. Their love, once destructive, found peace in echoes and wind. The bell no longer rang from torment but from release. Those who heard it said it brought calm instead of fear, a reminder that even broken things can find stillness. The Whitmore name vanished from records, but its story lived in whispers, in fleeting scents, in quiet hearts that once believed love could outlast time itself. The mansion was gone, but its promise remained. When the valley bloomed each spring, wild roses appeared first near the spot where the mansion once stood. Travelers called it coincidence, but locals knew better. They said it was the housekeeper's garden blooming again, tended by unseen hands. No one dared pick the flowers. They let them grow freely, year after year. When wind passed through, the petals rustled softly, forming a sound almost like a bell. Some said it was the last message of love, repeating endlessly through time, gentle, forgiving, and finally at peace. At dusk, when the valley quieted, the faint ring of that unseen bell still echoed through the air. It wasn't mournful anymore, it was steady, calm, and full of warmth. The sound carried far, reaching roads and villages beyond sight, as if reminding the world that love, once real, never truly ends. And if you listened closely enough, you could almost hear them, the housekeeper and the heir, walking together through the memory of their home, their hands entwined, their story finally finished, their hearts resting where they always belonged.